Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Christine Clawley, and she was on an episode of Monsters Inside Me because she had a flesh-eating bacteria. And have seen those shows before, and that when it comes to flesh-eating bacteria, I get like so gross. Like I think that would be like the worst thing, and so undeserving. I mean, you don't do anything to cause it. I mean, like why does this happen? So what do you know why it happened?
That's a great question. Something I'm still grappling with. It did start from I had a small cyst behind my vocal cords, and I had the strep bacteria in my system. So there was just the right combination where it just started from my vocal cords and then spread to my chest, abdomen, torso. So it was very, very serious. But I'll get into, maybe the spiritual, emotional relationship to illness, at least for myself,
How long
as
ago
well.
was this?
So I was 24 years old, and do you want me to just kind of launch
Sure.
into what
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
happened?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I was 24 years old. And to be honest, during this time in my life, I was going through depression, having some suicidal thoughts, very unhappy with the type of work I was doing, feeling a sense of, meaninglessness, purposelessness. And, looking back, I see how it was very much connected with me suppressing my voice and, not expressing myself because I thought, in order to survive, I have to do these jobs. And, we all know what it's like working within these systems. We often have to suppress our authentic self. So for actually 6 months before my illness, I would have these incredibly vivid nightmares or night terrors where it felt like I was being strangled by this very angry woman. And I would wake up, in the dream, she was darker. She may represent a part of my shadow aspect. She also reminded me of, an indigenous looking woman, which that's something which becomes very important to me later on in my work. However, I had these repeated nightmares, didn't know what they meant, but they were foreshadowing this major health crisis and illness. And in the dream, in several dreams, she's holding up this red shirt, kind of motioning for me to put this on. And I'm like, I don't like the red shirt, and that to me represents blood, the massive amounts of blood that I lost during this illness. So, and then another interesting piece, dreams play heavily into my work and my spiritual path. But I actually did dream that I had a cyst in my vocal cords. And in my dream, I was trying to remove it. This was something that didn't belong. And this is where the whole infection started. So during this time, I thought I just had the flu. It was the only 2 weeks I was without health insurance in my life. So I went to the hospital, and guess what? They turned me away. You're fine, you're overreacting. So when I went home, I thought that was a death sentence because I knew something was seriously wrong with my body. And I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time. I called my parents up, said, please come get me. I don't want to die alone here. They brought me back to Colorado Springs. And because I had just been to the hospital, they thought, well, we'll see if you get better. So for several days, I was literally in and out of consciousness in excruciating pain, most pain I've ever been in my life, so painful to swallow. And I knew I was going to die. And I was reflecting on, the love I would never have in my life, the things I, wouldn't get to do. And then there was a moment where all of a sudden my heart just started pounding so quickly, and I thought, this is it. Now I'm really dying. So I called out to my parents. They took me to the hospital. I went to Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs, and they saved my life, these nurses and doctors. But on the way, I was unconscious already. And by that point, I had gone into complete septic shock. A lung had collapsed. And so when the doctors, this part's a little graphic, so trigger warning. But when they cut in to give me a tracheotomy so I could breathe again, they realized it was the flesh-eating bacteria because dead tissue was spilling out. And they would not tell my parents until later, till I survived, that I really only had about a 1% chance of surviving. Because oftentimes what happens is someone will get this very fast-acting flesh-eating bacteria, and they'll have to amputate, because it's that serious. So for myself, when this happened, there was a ring that started around my throat. Again, that sense of strangulation that I was dreaming about for months, and then very quickly moved to my chest, my lungs. That's when a lung collapsed and it went down to my torso. So for 3.5 weeks, I was in a medically induced coma. And I did not clinically die, but I do remember consciously making a choice. And I had 3 big dreams that really were profound and still influence the direction of my life, I would say. One of the dreams felt like almost like an in-between realm where it felt like I was in this underground cavern floating on water. There was this, very interesting music and kind of a sense of distortion or not quite being in my body. And it felt like a kind of a waiting area, but also there was an awareness of definitely being in kind of a different reality or realm. The other dreams were very much indicative of what was happening to my body on a physical, emotional, spiritual level even. I was being tortured and dismembered. And this is very similar to a lot of Indigenous cultures talk about shamanic initiation and dismemberment and this feeling of being pulled apart. And I'm not claiming to be, a shaman or anything like that. I'm just merely pointing out some similarities in these ancient traditions of confrontations with death, confrontations with losing one sense of embodied identity, and how powerful that transformation is. So that was another dream. And I definitely felt, the support of my family, even though I wasn't awake. I remember some loved ones on the other side, feeling their presence, feeling that love. And especially when I woke from that coma, really felt that love from my ancestors. But the biggest dream I had, and the dream which I feel like is a part of my mission, and my work as a counselor, involved what some might describe, and I don't claim to be an expert or to know. It could be another life, another part of myself, living another dimension, could be a past life. But this experience was so real, it very much felt like I lived an entire lifetime as another person, but with my soul, similar qualities, except I was Asian. And I was trapped on this ship, this large ship out in the middle of the ocean, filled with slaves. And they weren't just slaves, they were female sex slaves. And I was older, I was in my 40s, and I hated myself because my role was bringing these women onto the ship and kind of, how do I say, managing them in a way. And women weren't allowed to look at one another, weren't allowed to speak. And so there was this incredible feeling of loneliness, isolation, and being trapped on this ship. So this was my life. I had lived this way for as long as I knew. And then there was this moment, I don't know where she came from, but I'm going to cry. There was no communication allowed, but this woman appeared and we locked eyes. And there was this incredible sense of empathy, connection, deep understanding of another's pain and suffering. And I recognized this woman as my sister. And, later I would learn that sometimes when the medication from being in the coma would wear off, I would come out of that state and I would lock eyes with my sister, my biological sister, my family. So I don't know if that maybe had some influence, but to me, this was a turning point, not only within this dream realm, but a turning point in me making the choice to come back to this reality. And so we began just from this simple connection, secretly planning to help liberate the other women on the ship, ourselves. And there was this feeling of hope, of connection, of aliveness again. And so I love telling this story because I can see, you know, even this happened when I was 24, I'm almost 40 now, but I can see the power of that dream and how that's still impacting my life. You know, right now, I mean, all over the world, there's so many women that are oppressed in different ways, whether that be, you know, the inequality of men and women in other countries, poverty, human trafficking, or objectification. And for myself, I had really struggled with what it is to be a woman, you know, the role of that. And I, in many ways, resented, you know, kind of being pushed into a certain role. And so as I've worked with more and more people, I'm just humbled, and it's profound, the power of, you know, women, but also men coming together and telling their stories of the pain, the suffering they've endured, and the healing that can come from that. Because when one person speaks up and shares, that gives another person courage. And that really is the only way to break the cycle of abuse, because the silence of the survivors keeps that power structure in place, keeps that abuse in place. So, you know, as a counselor, I feel just so honored to be able to witness and hold space for these sacred stories of what people have endured and how they've survived. And I feel, you know, grateful that I get to share my story with you and your audience to hopefully inspire hope. I don't think one necessarily needs to approach death to have a spiritual experience, but I think each person has the capacity to experience love, relief, spiritual transcendence, connection through facing our own internal suffering and the things that we feel we must suppress in order to fit into society or survive or function. So that's a big part of my story and journey.
The experience where you started feeling hope, is that where you started getting better in your recovery?
I believe so. And there was some amnesia when I was beginning to awaken out of the coma. I really did think all of those things had happened to me. I didn't, it was hard for me to remember what my life was like before. And I also do remember, although again, it's so hard to describe these experiences, but especially I remember surrendering to, I don't know what it is, creator, love, God, something so profound and powerful to the point where there's just this awareness that there is no death, that there is a space where all the suffering goes away, you know. So just the power of surrender. And when we do that, we have access to this incredible unlimitedness within us. And then also it helps connect us to others. So following this experience, I had a long road to recovery. I could not breathe on my own. I was intubated for quite some time. That was the scariest part of my recovery, because I had a heart attack as I was learning to breathe, because it was so difficult. I couldn't speak. I have a paralyzed vocal cord even still. So my voice was just a whisper. I lost all my hair. I was 80 pounds. So I even had the I'm going to look back and say, wonderful, humbling experience to look sick to the point where I got to experience how others respond, you know, the sense of horror, the sense of disgust. And I that was very humbling, definitely increased my sense of empathy for, you know, what people who struggle with physical and mental health disabilities go through. And so there, I definitely had some PTSD from that experience. But in addition to that, this is what I'm so passionate about in my work too, is the language we use around trauma, because there's all these mental health diagnoses and there's all this further re-traumatization and stigma placed on survivors of abuse and trauma. But there's gifts as well. So much of the time, people who've experienced these extreme kind of cases of abuse or trauma have access to heightened intuition. Like myself, I all of a sudden found myself being able to feel what other people felt very intensely without, you know, understanding how that's possible. I still, and I've finally begun to integrate this piece, have precognitive dreams, which was very disorienting for me and made me question, you know, free will. And I felt like I was losing my mind. But then I found Carl Jung, who helped me put these pieces together and gave me a foundation to stand on for the work that I do now, and validating these experiences, because that inner world, our imagination, our intuition, our somatic experiences, our emotions are messages from our souls. We have to listen to that feedback. And if we don't, that feedback often gets louder and louder and louder until we're listening. And so, you know, a lot of the work I do in psychotherapy is trying to help people attune to themselves, because in our culture, we're often taught to suppress our intuition, to suppress our inner compass, attune to the authority figure, be obedient, and these kinds of things. And I do think there's a major paradigm shift happening now where that old way is beginning to crumble as people have more near-death experiences, embrace the paranormal, other ways of knowing and intuition. And so it's really exciting to finally be living in a time where you can talk about these things without being, you know, institutionalized or you know, labeled as being evil or something like that. There's been so much fear around that. There's a wonderful author. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit.
Okay.
His name is Thomas Sayers, and he wrote a book called The Manufacture of Madness, where he traces the roots of modern psychiatry, which often might involve involuntary hospitalization or punishment of women or people experiencing poverty or abuse. And he traces that back to actually the Inquisition, a lot of these similar treatments and methods. So it's helpful to look at the historical roots and patterns of power within society. And yeah, I think it's beginning to change. So.
That sounds interesting. What did you say? The manifestation of what? What's the name of that book?
Oh, it's called The Manufacture of Madness.
Oh, manufacture. Okay. Of madness.
You know,
That sounds interesting.
language is so powerful, and you know, who defines what is normal, what is okay, and what is mental illness, what is abnormal. That's very powerful. And these experiences have been relegated to, you know, a realm where it's been taboo for quite some time. And I do think that's beginning to change, which is very, you know, hopeful through the work that you're doing and others like you, of just vocalizing these experiences.
Now, I know you were young when this happened, but were you a counselor yet?
No. So it's been very much, I mean, I was a philosophy major before that, and very, you know, rational, logical, yeah, very ambitious, future oriented. And so this was so life-changing, you know, in many, many ways. And I probably wouldn't be a counselor had it not been for that experience. So it's been a big part of, yeah, my healing journey, as well as, I didn't mention this before, but Native American and Indigenous spirituality has also been a big part of my path. And again, a lot of those rituals and worldview, way of relating to each other, nature, have been pathologized. I mean, there's really an unacknowledged genocide that's happened in this country, and we're still seeing, you know, the results and consequences of that with indigenous populations. And excuse me, I think finally, you know, we're recognizing that ancient wisdom, that there's so much that we can learn from some of these different ways of thinking, you know. In Western morality and a lot of Western religions, there's kind of this mind-body split. And then there's this emphasis on more traditionally masculine qualities. So rationality, logic, power over, you know, domination, rather than, you know, more egalitarian forms of working in groups. And a lot of indigenous spirituality has, you know, a respect for nature, a respect for feminine, honoring, you know, the feminine. And I think we're a society and world that's greatly out of balance. And Carl Jung talked about this as well. There's another wonderful book I'll put out there. It's called The Earth Has a Soul. And let me see if I can find the author. It's Meredith Sabini, but it examines Jung's work, talking about the trends that he was seeing in the West and this overvaluation of technology, focus on profit, speed, efficiency. And we really lose something when we're so focused on that. We lose meaning, we lose our connection to nature, our place in the world. And, you know, we're again seeing the results of that we are speeding. We're moving in a direction that's suicidal because we're not honoring the true value of life and death. You know, there's a place for both. And another, you know, powerful thing about looking at near-death experiences is acknowledging that death fear, that death denial that is so, you know, embedded in our culture. And there's gifts. There's so many incredible gifts from just reflecting and meditating on one's own mortality in this world. I mean, I do believe that the soul goes on, that there's other realms or other ways that energy gets transmuted, but we have to acknowledge the temporary nature of things. We have to acknowledge the true value of things. And when we don't do that, when we act like we live forever and we're never going to die, and we don't honor the life of people, of, you know, animals and beings, then it just becomes this kind of, I mean, almost nihilistic predatory force that is, I mean, that's really what I see is a big, I'm trying to think of how to frame it. Something that I think a lot of people feel today, this sense of isolation. I hear this from a lot of my clients, struggling to find purpose, meaning, connection. And there is this kind of dehumanization in our culture that's happening. And so to tell these stories honestly, to again connect with each other and not allow these other systems to form the narrative and dominate our experience is necessary. We need to create new values. We need to find new ways of finding meaning and connecting. Otherwise, yeah, I worry where things are headed, but some degree of suffering sometimes is necessary for our own how do I say, spiritual transformation and just waking up, you know, within my own experience. Again, there's such power in being able to surrender to one's pain. There's such acceptance. There's such there can be such a relief just to be able to be present with that. So
I'm thinking that it'd be so nice if there was a program designed for schools, to fit grade levels, maturity levels, but, as it make it as innocent as, discussing spirituality, but I think they could find out things we need to know as child protection. Because, kids often have out of body experiences during abuse, or they have near death experiences when this, it's that bad, neglect or abuse is that bad. OBE during sexual abuse or physical abuse and torture, emotional, like shaming, whatever. And those kids don't understand what those are. They wouldn't even know that they were telling a sign of abuse if they told, yes, I've had that. They would, as an investigator, you go, has anyone touched you? Has anyone hurt you? No, because they're afraid. But and I'm not trying to be sneaky, I'm just thinking that if kids knew that other people would understand those experiences and talk to them further about what those might mean to them, or when they happen, when did it happen? What was going on surrounding that? I was 16, kidnapped and raped, and as he approached me, I knew I was going to be raped. I left my body and I was up, I was praying to God, I wish I wasn't even on this earth. Suddenly I am in the night sky. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination. I was in the night sky among the twinkling stars. I looked down, I see my little skinny, 80-pound body at 16, my long brown hair blown in the wind, my shirt's on, and I looked down at Earth. What triggered me to think of it when you named that one book, because I thought of Earth as a soul, because I thought, look down at Earth, just like you would look down at a globe, sitting on the table in your science class. And I look down at Earth, it's in this black night sky, just like I am. And I'm thinking how heavy it must be, but it seems weightless, just like I am. It's just weightless. And I'm thinking it had to be a soul, just like me. And I'll never forget it. Well, wait a minute, am I gonna stay up here forever? I'm only 16, this is nice, I'm rescued. I didn't experience nothing of the rape. And so when I come back, he was done, and he said to me, wow, I want a wife like you someday. And I thought, yeah, I lay there and was dead. That's what you want. And of course I didn't say anything. But so then the next day when I got away from him and the police took me to the hospital, do the exam and all this stuff, they said, did you have sex? And I said, yes. I couldn't say it was rape because I didn't fight, because I wasn't there. And I thought, how can we tell kids that these things happen, that you weren't consenting? Because
that is so important.
How can we do that?
That is so important. And it's very much a part of this patriarchal, masculine on the negative side, domination, mentality. And it's just as harmful to men because they can't connect with their femininity and vulnerability or emotions. They're conditioned to be cut off from that. And it's that cycle of violence that gets repeated. And a huge part of the violence collectively and person to person is, it's your fault I raped you. It's your fault this happened to you. It's that shaming and victim blaming and gaslighting. And that's why, it's so necessary and powerful for people to talk about their experiences and own this. And we don't have spaces for people to really talk about these things. Our children's schools aren't safe. The bullying is tremendous. The shootings. I feel so.
I had a couple of kids recently that had affairs with their teachers, sexually abused by their teachers.
Yes.
Never brought out to anybody.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that I've really been fascinated with researching. And I don't think, especially in the realm of like NDEs and spiritualities, is given enough attention, is spiritual abuse, or the side of cults, the shadow side, excuse me. So there are shadow sides to these experiences. Surrender to God can be beautiful, but if you're surrendering to a supposed spiritual leader, and he's wanting to sexually abuse someone,
What do you
that,
mean? Like
well,
clergy or?
there's so many cases of, yes, spiritual teachers abusing their followers or their disciples. And a lot of it comes back to authority, this conditioning to be obedient, blindly obedient to authority, to suppress our own instincts and needs. And, I don't think I gave enough attention to what you just said. So thank you for sharing that about your experience of freezing and dissociating, because that is the most common and
Yeah, but see,
safest
that's
thing
what
to
they call
do.
it, dissociating. And I wish they'd stop calling it that, because that to me is like a mental disorder, like a psychological break or something. But
Right.
to me, now that I'm older, I look back and I think, God rescued me,
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
and that's not a psychological break. And all
No.
these NDEs, well, most of them are God rescuing, in my mind, God
Yes.
rescuing somebody.
Yes.
Say they're in a plane that's about to crash. They didn't feel the crash. God took them before that.
Yeah.
The child hit by a
Absolutely.
car. Really? I didn't feel a thing because suddenly I was over here going through these flowers and this lake. And, it's just like rescue.
Yes.
It was no
Yes.
different that I wasn't dead, but I was like emotionally dead.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like God just rescues. And, science doesn't want to acknowledge God. They don't want to say that three-letter word. They don't
Yes.
want
Very true.
XYZ to equal God.
Yes.
So
Yes.
therefore, they're going to call it dissociate. They're going to call it mental illness. They're going to call it, I don't know.
Mhm.
But and then, then people have an NDEs. It's the same thing. They come back and they're just as silenced as I was after a rape. I can't talk about this. People think I'm
Exactly.
crazy.
Yes.
And
So
even
it's
like you,
another
I'm sure it took
layer of
time
abuse.
because you had recovery before you could
Mhm.
even start to analyze that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I thought, gosh, am I losing my mind? I'm feeling all these things so much more intensely. I'm having these dreams that are coming true. But again, if you have an experience that's positive and life-saving like that and is profoundly important, where you felt rescued, you felt saved and protected, why can't you talk about that openly? Why are we going to why is a psychotherapist or mental health provider going to label that as negative? That's not their place to do. And in addition to that, you know, science really has to begin to look at the validity of these experiences, that there are other ways of knowing. Now, we prefer the scientific method, predict, control, repeat. Um, but a lot of paranormal or intuitive experiences, are not so easily categorizable, but they are verifiable. And time is another one of those things that I don't think it's what science, how science conceives of it. There is something else. And one other thing I really appreciate about Jung is his emphasis on like synchronicity, meaning, and it's such a different way to engage in time, because from grade school on, we're conditioned to always be sacrificing the present for this future goal, future success of this, or this is, when I get the fame, when I
Yeah.
get the recognition, the reward, then I'll be okay. And that's giving away our power. That's always sacrificing, and the thing we're looking for might never come in that way. But if we reverse that, and this is, I think about inner transformation or spiritual alchemy, when we look at that internal world, the unconscious, dreams, imagination, the emotions, body-centered healing. Amazing miracles, synchronicities can occur. And we become empowered, to be the creators of, to just be creators in our life and to own our stories. And so I hope, and I think there's a shift going on where I work with all ages, but my heart really does go out to the younger people right now, just because, there's so many problems they're inheriting: pollution, climate change, political, unrest, economic problems, and they don't really have, these systems aren't really working for them anymore. So a lot of young people are suicidal, are depressed, are anxious. They can't fit within the system. It's too hard and too painful. And so I think that this younger generation is really going to be creating new systems because simply because they cannot conform. And in some ways that's a good thing, but I think they need guidance because there are so many young people that, are harming themselves or taking their own lives because of this sense of meaninglessness, disconnection, alienation. And so, yeah, that's another big part of my mission, is just trying to help assist in some way. And
It seems like when there's a breakdown of the family, there's a breakdown of society.
yes, well, and you having a background in social work and counseling probably understand that family dynamics are so powerful and profound, and the cultures or the values within a culture, society, are mirrored in the microcosm of each nuclear family. And so when you have, that unequal power between a man and woman, or a woman is supposed to be, subservient, or, just accepts the abuse, these unhealthy dynamics occur. And it causes real mental health issues, real physical problems, when that violence is kept within the family, reinforced, justified, and continually covered up. So, when we heal individually, when we begin to recognize these unhealthy dynamics, empower ourselves, that helps collectively begin to shift the values too, I think.
Southeast Ohio, and we still have a lot of counties in West Virginia and Ohio, and I'm sure it spreads on everywhere, but because everybody told me when I worked here, oh, it's this way everywhere, and I couldn't accept that. But it is that way everywhere. But it's that, say, for an example, I go to a home and this woman tells me, my ex-husband has been breaking in here while I'm in the shower, threatening to kill me. And the cop said, well, if you end up dead, we'll know who did it, won't we? That same kind of crap, day in and day out, that same attitude. And then when I become a victim of domestic violence, me, investigator, right? And I go to them, what do they say to me? I worked with these guys for years. What do they say to me? Well, he's not in the house right now, is he? Call us when he's in the house. I said, you mean I gotta put me and my kids in danger and call you? I called you. You heard me screaming for help. I said, that was me. I said, he was slamming me against the wall. My kids were in the basement, traumatized from what he did earlier. And you're telling me I gotta go back in that house and call you when he's there? Why can't you go now so I can go on with my kids? So me and the kids had to go to a hotel, and it's just like, they refuse to file the charges. They're all the men stick together. All these women are just bitches.
It really
We're just lying bitches.
Yes. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that story and having the courage to do that, because I've seen that as well. I've experienced, domestic violence as well. And I've helped many clients who've experienced that. And that is too often the response. And then, a woman ends up dead. And a lot of times, there's these serial killers or murderers, and it just shows the lack of care, attended to finding who's taken this woman's life, shows the value of women. And then looking at the missing and murdered Indigenous women, that's a whole other, issue. you know, you
They
know,
don't even look for them, do they?
they don't even look for them. You
What
know,
is
they
that about? Like, and there's nobody to go to complain.
yes, well, that's why, you know, women helping each other, sharing each other's stories, creating
Yeah, but we got to
networks.
get past that, right? I
We
mean,
do have to
every
get
lawyer
past
you
that.
call, oh, I ain't taking that. Oh, I don't want that. You know? And I'm sure it's
Yeah.
that way for them too, because why is it going on?
Well, and we have to look at the deeper roots of, I mean, I think it really, well, I don't want to oversimplify it, but there is this, you know, there is this hatred towards the feminine. I mean, you look at, I don't know, I may offend some people here,
There
but you
is.
look at,
Just call it
you
what
look
it
at,
is.
okay, the Christian, you know, stories, like Mary Magdalene, you know, her and many different stories, you know, being Jesus's closest disciple, and then, you know, having her turned into a prostitute, and, you know, just the language within, I wouldn't say even the New Testament, but a lot of, you know, language within the Old Testament justifies violence against women. So again, I may anger some people, and I apologize. I don't want to step on any toes, but there is oftentimes like a religious or spiritual context for justifying the abuse,
Sometimes it's just plain
abuse
prejudice.
against, sometimes it's just plain prejudice. And it's not just, the real world impact of that is not just harming women and children and the earth. You know, where the earth, a lot of indigenous cultures look as the earth as a mother, a living being, and, you know, a being that is being raped and tortured in a way. So that same attitude is being carried out, that same belief system in different ways, but also men. That's the point I want to make, is that there's a lot of men who are harmed by this as well. You know, this limited view
Yeah.
of what's
The women
acceptable.
that cry domestic violence because they're mad.
Mhm.
He's got a girlfriend. I'm going to call and throw his butt in jail. I'm going to scream abuse. I
Or, you know,
mean,
men not being allowed to be in touch with their own femininity of vulnerability. You know, rage and violence being the only acceptable expression of what it is to be a man. You know, we need more story. We need different stories, new myths, different ways of re-envisioning the masculine and feminine, because
we
this
need to
is
get rid of these action movies.
new
We can
stories. We
sit here and
need
say what we
fresh
need to
blood.
do. We're
Yes.
going to get nowhere, right?
I mean, but it does. There's certain movies that will show violence, and they'll show the actual consequences and the shadow side. But there's a lot of movies that are just pure indulgence and watching sadistic actions being done to others, you know, for entertainment. And
Every
I
time
think it
there's a
is
school incident,
desensitizing.
everybody's screaming, blaming the left is blaming the right because of guns. And I get so upset because I don't think it's mostly right that's making these Hollywood movies
It's
that's
much
showing
deeper.
all this violence. That's all you turn on Netflix. Violence, scary, violence, scary. What do I want? I don't want none of
Or
that.
rape, sex, and the appetite for the shock value just keeps going up and up and up.
And the revenge. There's always like got to get revenge by doing this
Oh
horrible
yeah.
violent act to settle scores. And
But again, this line of, I mean, it's the same story being told over and over again. And it's like at a certain point, are we going to get sick of it?
yeah,
Are people going to step away? And that's really the only way, because they're giving us what give, you know, has high, what people watch, what has
yeah, we
high
need Michael
ratings and
Landon
shock
back.
values.
Highway to Heaven, Little House on the Prairie. The movie, the Waltons, the movies where they had a moral ending that the good guy's going to win. That you just got to be a good person, no matter what happens. You know that's in some way you'll win just by being a good person, and that's not what is going on now. It's who ends up killing who at the end of the movie.
And again, you know, at what point are we going to say, okay, this is like enough? How much, it just continues. But at the
Yeah.
same time, there is a lot of violence on this planet. There's a lot of violence hidden within families. And it's intergenerational. It's passed on one generation to another. And, you know, we need to begin to look at that and, you know, not normalize these things anymore. Because when it stays hidden, when it stays secret, then it just gets acted out unconsciously again and again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, these bad things happened even back in, bonanza days.
yes,
The good guy,
yes,
they still, learned it through their families. And
yeah,
everybody was just supposed to keep quiet. And it's still that way.
yes,
Everybody gets together at Thanksgiving. How many were sexually abused and having to bear this during this
exactly,
day?
yes,
Christmas, they gotta bear it, they gotta keep quiet
yes, yes,
because it's
absolutely,
family.
yes. Um, there's another concept that I really appreciate about Jung, and he talks about the different aspects of the self, and that we all have, you know, this persona, idealized image of how we want to appear to others, you know, as good, attractive, successful, but that we all have a shadow inside of us, and the shadow often involves, you know, emotions that are not socially acceptable, so like fear, anger, jealousy, insecurity. And you know, Jung thought it was very important to recognize that we all have the capacity to do harm or do evil, and the more we can come into contact with that part of ourselves. And so when I think back to the dream I had of the woman strangling me, I think of my own shadow, and that in some ways I was doing that to myself. I was, you know, strangling myself. I wasn't expressing my
Where you
rage,
were
my
suicidal and all
unhappiness.
that.
Oh yeah, you know, and a lot of women, again, it's not socially acceptable for women to express anger, so it's suppressed. They end up turning it into themselves, and it ends up looking more like depression, and that losing that desire to live. So, you know, through dreams, through therapy, active imagination, creative pursuits, we can access that shadow within, and then we don't have to project it onto others. And this happens in family units. We often, you know, in therapy, identify the scapegoat as the child who unconsciously accepts the burden of all the negative attributes of the parents. It's projected onto that one child, and they're punished for it. And we see that collectively. So Nazi Germany would be the biggest example, you know, of Hitler scapegoating certain groups. And it's powerful. That emotional energy is so powerful in mobilizing people, uh, sometimes towards horrible, awful, violent acts. And so if we can manage to come in contact with our own shadow, my point is these types of awful, violent things are less likely to happen. And you just pointed to the fact that the right and left is so politically divided right now. And that's why more than ever, it's so crucial that there begins to be dialogue again, you know, that people begin to find that common ground.
And stop believing
I,
everything you hear on the news.
yeah, I mean, and I grew up in a small farm in Kansas. I grew up in a very small town. I'm so proud of my roots. I love the fact that that's where I grew up. I also live in a city now. So
Are you
I
in
can,
Colorado Springs still, or?
well, actually, I'm in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, that's right. I
So
remember seeing it on your email. Okay.
yeah. And so, you know, there's different strengths and weaknesses that both city living and rural life have. And I think people in the rural areas are, you know, more in touch with nature. There's less people, so oftentimes there's a friendliness, a sense of connection, whereas in the cities there can be more of a coldness sometimes, or you know, there's so many people, sometimes people can be aggressive. And but there's more opportunities, and a lot of people in rural America are feeling, I think, you know, disenfranchised, ignored, you know, by mainstream politics. And so, you know, I always had this ideal vision of how neat would it be if there was some kind of exchange program of trying to overcome these boundaries, and having city people go to rural, places and invest and learn and grow, and vice versa. We need to honor these different ways of being and living.
Yeah, a lot of the city people assume that us country people are like the Wrong Turn movie, that we're all inbred and we're going to eat you.
Yes, and that another stereotype that's not helpful, and that's creating fear of the other. That's not helping create understanding or connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I think everywhere there's what we call good and what we would call bad people. There's people that are doing bad things. There's people that are trying to do good things. And no matter where you live,
Absolutely.
we're actually, mixed all over. I don't think there's just like, oh, that area over there, every single person is bad. They're going to kill you.
Yes. Well, and
or
a lot of
that
times,
area over there, everybody's all nice and good, because there might be a serial killer.
There's always a little bit more to the story than what we see on the surface level. And even people who've committed the most horrific crimes, a lot of these people have been horribly abused. So recognizing when we make a judgment on someone, we're only seeing like that person in this moment in time. But what if we were to see, everything that they've lived through? We might suspend judgment, or we might say something different. So, that transgenerational cycle of abuse, I mean, it's ancient. It just goes on and on and on. And so I don't know, I think it's really powerful to try to work on healing that. And I do think when we begin to heal our own trauma, that can have a ripple effect with our ancestors and for our descendants.
I hope that near-death experiences, conversations on them are, bringing people together, that, all cultures have this. But then again, sometimes I feel like it's just something else being used to divide, because what I call New Age, I see them on Facebook all the time. They're putting down Christians. And they don't want anybody saying that they became more Christian after their NDE. They want them to say they're less religious, or they got rid of their religion after their NDE. And I'm like, stop.
Right.
Let
that
them
is
have
so
their experience.
Yes.
And make of it what they will. If you want to make of it that, but don't say all NDEers or most NDEers do this. So to be an NDEer, you must think like this. And I see it all the time, from the very top of, the NDE food chain, all the way to, just people griping on these NDE groups. Oh no, you're less religious after you have an NDE. And then flip on an NDE video, and this guy's like, somebody asked him, are you more religious, less religious? Oh no, I thank God, I give my life back, and I appreciate, and I pray all the time, and I don't go to church anymore. But he says, I go to church when nobody's there and pray, and that's his thing. But and so let us all have what feeds our soul.
Yes.
Not your soul, not your politics, but what feeds me and makes me feel more joyful. I don't take that away from anybody in this day and age. If they find their happy place, let them have it.
Yes. Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because there is such a resistance towards that word God, in academia, in science. And there's limits to science. Science, only focuses on what's measurable, quantifiable, and we have to acknowledge these experiences and listen to these people and what their experiences are respectfully. And there is concern about NDEs being studied scientifically. Are we going to water it down? Are we going to force it into this mold of less religious? And that's not fair either. Honor the diversity of experiences. And religion is a huge, there's incredible benefit, for a lot of people who.
If me being a Christian makes me not steal, not lie, not want to hurt anybody, well, leave me alone, because that's what we want out of our citizens, to where they're not lying, stealing, hurting anybody. If you try to take that away from somebody, some people are going to crumble because that is our core strength. That's what's got us
Yes,
through life so far. So it'll continue to get us through life. And don't go trying to take that away from people. And they're like,
absolutely.
if they want to go to church, that church on Sunday, or if they want to go there on Saturday, let them go. Don't be
Yes,
saying you shouldn't do that. That means you're this, you're
absolutely.
that. You're judging if you go to church.
Yes.
Oh no, I think you're judging.
I
Leave
mean,
them
that
alone.
religion has saved so many people's lives. I mean, that has to be recognized and honored. At the same time, just like with anything, I'm a Jungian, it is helpful to look at the shadow, and it is
Mhm.
helpful to acknowledge abuses of power so that that's not repeated, or sexual abuse, because
Or people
those,
walking in church and they're not accepted because they're divorced, because of the color of their skin, because of their
right.
sexual preference, whatever.
Yes,
Yeah, I understand that that person felt uncomfortable, but don't throw out all churches because
exactly.
sometimes somebody feels uncomfortable.
And I think
So,
for a lot of NDErs, it deepens their spiritual connection or religious connection or path. So, I mean, I think when you go deeper into any religious path, at the core is that unconditional love, and all else just falls into place when you're able to access that. So, yeah, really good points. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
yeah. So we sure get off topic on this. It's just like it just takes a life of its own and off we go. And I guess I have my triggers too, like, oh, that was reminding me of, rape and being out of
Yes.
body. And what does psychology say about that? And, oh, what about in schools? What are we, and so my mind just starts. My poor husband, he has to deal with me first thing in the morning when I have I'm back to having coffee now before I could have caffeine. And so now I can have caffeine. And so my mind's just like,
Yes, yeah.
but
No, it's great. I love your passion. I appreciate it and your courage to share your own story because there is such shame that survivors carry. And the more people can speak up about this, again, that breaks that silence. It gives other people permission to talk. And yeah,
I was thinking when I was doing dishes yesterday, I thought, boy, I bet the audience gets tired of me bringing up, my abuse things because I have PTSD. And I bet they get tired of me bringing it up in every little thing. But then I thought, you know what? I wonder if the men in the audience, which there is a lot more women than men, but I wonder if the men, the odds are some of them have sexually abused. And
well,
wonder if they start to
mhm,
think, wow, Peggy is really suffering with that every day of her life, all her whole life. Look what it does to girls. It's just
mhm,
not some little thing that didn't matter. Look what it does for their whole life. That's what they're not
yes,
seeing. That's what they're not
yes,
getting. They don't understand why it's against the law and why there are such strict penalties.
mhm,
Because even though physically the girl walk away, look unscathed, you can't see emotionally, sexually, relationship wise, everything, educationally,
everything,
financially, everything that
everything.
is going to come up.
Absolutely. Yes. And again, a lot of it is an intergenerational, and our society glorifies, encourages it, that's the way men are supposed to behave, or that's okay to rape a woman. And even the definition of rape, there's a lot of people that I've worked with who said, well, I was on a date and I didn't want this, and I tried to say no, but then he raped me, or they don't define it as rape, but that is a rape. So just looking at consent and boundaries, yeah, what we're shown in the media and TV, and men are often conditioned and encouraged to be aggressive, be violent, don't cry, don't feel empathy. That's a sign of weakness. And it does do harm to men internally. If we raise men in a way where they were allowed to be empathetic, be sensitive, have respect for women, yeah, I think our culture would look different.
I think if
Very
they can
different.
talk to, boys, because at some age they're gonna, odds are several are going to sexually assault, is let them think how they would feel if a man did that to them,
And there's a
or
lot
a
of men who
woman
are
did that.
survivors of abuse, rape, childhood rape.
How would you feel? Would you be able to tell your friends, or would you be too ashamed? Would you be able to tell a teacher? Would you
Absolutely.
be too ashamed? Would you be able to talk about it
Yes,
at a party, or would you be labeled as gay? What would you do because
exactly.
you couldn't talk about it?
Yeah.
How would you feel during the assault to have complete lost control of your body, like you're an object? How is that going to affect you later? Do you think these memories are going to keep recurring? Da da da. To let them have an idea, this isn't just a 5-second act.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you're treating someone like an object to be used and discarded. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And odds
again,
are
it's
probably somebody did it to them,
yes,
and they're finally feeling that control or something.
exactly. That sense of power and control, can be intoxicating, and there's different ways of feeling power. One can feel empowered from within in a group of others, connecting, or it can be that power over, that domination. And you probably are aware of, what is it? The cycle. Yeah, no, the power and control wheel. We look at the different dynamics in domestic violence and how oftentimes that abuser feels at the core so insecure and empty and weak that they try to control every aspect of the partner's life and have that sense of inflation. So yeah, there's a ripple effect there.
And we just don't
Mhm.
live in a society where people feel it's safe to go get help and talk about it, because there's consequences of talking about it. If you have children, they gonna be taken away from you because you're living in a domestic violence situation? Or if you tell them that your spouse is abusing your children, same scenario, what's going to happen? Somebody going to prison? It's going to be taken out of your control. And so now you're losing more control.
Exactly. And this is why it's so good to talk about these things and look at the larger systems that are there to help and how they often end up doing harm or overreacting or perpetuating that abuse in some ways. So there's these dynamics within these
My
different
ex said to
dynamics.
me, he said, "You won't file charges on me again because second offense, would go straight to prison." And he said, "You wouldn't get child support, so you're not going to file on me."
Oh my gosh,
So,
unbelievable.
and a lot of women will say, "Well, financially, I can't leave."
Exactly. That's a big, big part of it. Yes. I mean, and that's why I really think women helping other women, is so huge because there's that oftentimes shared lived experience, that understanding of the barriers, the stereotypes, the oppression. And, it can just be really helpful. There's this really good, I can't, well, I'll forget it because I can't remember the name of it, but it's this French video that involves kind of what would it be like for a man to live in a world where women dominated every industry, and it shows the man kind of walking through a street, being harassed and catcalled by different women, and then he goes to report this harassment to a female figure, and she's kind of demeaning to him and putting,
Well,
and
weren't
this
you
is
wearing a
really
wife beater?
exactly. I
Come
mean,
on, you asked for it.
exactly, though. It's so pervasive. We're just swimming in it. And so to have other women in positions of power and authority to help, validate women's experiences, listen, is truly powerful. And I do think there is a shift in a positive direction with that. So hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know. Wish I could be president for one day.
There you go.
That's not gonna happen. But it's been very interesting.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know what the answers are. What's easy to say what the problems are, but until attorneys are able to have courage to take cases and make stands instead of saying, like, well, everybody knows what that county's like, and I'm not gonna go there and tell them how to change it, and stop this good old boy
Yes.
system to where it is what I mean. Even though that happened to me 30 years ago, just last year, my daughter-in-law, I saw my son's wife, my youngest adopted son. She called the law on my son, who was being dangerous and deserved to be called on. I helped her make that call, and the police come in and lied and said, Children's Services will be here this week. This other officer is a Children's Services supervisor, and he's already made a report, and they'll be out here because the condition of the home was like a city dump, but they needed a call. And he says, so they'll be out. And so that gave me a false sense of security that things are going to get fixed at this home. My grandkids are going to be safe. He lied to me. He was not a supervisor of Children's Services. There was no report made to Children's Services.
Oh my gosh.
Somebody told me somebody was sleeping with her in the police department.
Oh no.
And I know she said a correctional officer was living with them and his wife, and he had a crush on her. Now, I don't know if that went over into the police department or if what it was, but I asked the lawyer, why would they lie to me? Because I went to the head of the police department and told them about it, and they're going to do nothing. Oh, they trust their officers. And I said, well, I called Children's Services later and said, well, so did you, well, no, we don't have any supervisor. I knew you didn't, but I knew. So he was lying, but, they're not going to do anything. They just cover up. And, one day a police officer in that town, I was driving through where they had the traffic stop. And as I drove through, the cop reached his head in my window and called me a stupid bee.
That is not professional or okay.
And so I drove on down the bottom of the hill to the other officer, and I said, he just called me and he's like, get out of here. Oh crap. So I went and I want to make a report. Guess what? The one that called me stupid bee made a beeline because I complained to him on the bottom of the hill. He knew I was going to complain. He made a beeline right there. I'll take your report. I said, oh, no, you're not. You're going to give me somebody else.
That's a conflict of interest. Yeah.
So somebody else come along, wouldn't let me make a report. So the next day I called the captain and we went in and I said, they would not let me make a report and blah, blah, blah. And they didn't care. And so the guy said, well, yeah, I said that, but I didn't mean you. I said, you stuck your head in my window and called me that. He said, no, I meant a kid on a bike that was behind you. I said, there was no kid on a bike behind me, but are you mean to tell me you called a kid a stupid bee?
Oh gosh.
Why would you call a kid a stupid bee? Oh, they are back here doing that. I was like, you don't have a right to call anybody stupid bee. I said, I was a counselor in a prison. I worked at blah, 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 blah. We don't get to call people stupid.
Exactly.
Much as we might want to.
Yeah. Wow.
We don't. We're not given that opportunity.
There's abuses of power in every industry. That's why we have to be really careful, and we have to try to hold ourselves, other people accountable, and especially, in social work and medical field, policemen, that vicarious trauma piece can be so impactful too, where, they become desensitized to violence, or they begin to act violently because they've had their life threatened. So now they're hyper vigilant. A lot of issues we're dealing with collectively.
Yeah. And just a year ago, for us to all be watching the news and see top doctors, emergency personnel, firemen, nurses losing their job because they wouldn't take a shot. I mean, if that doesn't tell people we have no control over the systems that be, I don't know what does. Because even though we can talk about things on a small scale, but they go right up the ladder in big scales. When you see some getting by with horrible things, nobody will prosecute them because they are who they are. And then you have this over here, they're just picking them to death, just trying anything they can to find something on them. And that's just the systems that we're working in. We are in a corrupt country. I don't know about other countries. I didn't begin to go there. But we are in a corrupt,
We
very
are, but
corrupt
there's,
country.
there's so, but yet this country, there's such, well, I'm trying to think of, there's definitely a shadow side, to this country, and that's the poverty, the violence, the worship of money. In many ways, we have lost our soul as a country,
Yeah.
because look at what we worship, youth, fame, superficiality. But I think, my hope was that, facing that we could come together, as a country and really address some of these issues through open dialogue, respecting all viewpoints, honoring people's
That's why I love having
decisions.
my channel, because I have talked to people in other countries on my channel, and they feel just like we do.
Yeah, yeah,
They're having the same issues.
same
And I was like, you
issues.
know what? There's more of us than there is them. It's too bad that we can't get a worldwide humanity committee or something, something that will watchdog for humanity,
Well, the internet in some ways has that potential. There's a lot of negative aspects, that the internet has proliferated, bullying and,
censorship.
rape culture,
So,
censorship, absolutely. But it has connected people that otherwise would never have been connected. It's, helped spread different ideas. Yeah, getting to talk with people who live in other countries. I get to do that as a counselor too. And I learn, I grow, my world's expanded when I'm able to come in contact with people from a different culture, religion, or ethnicity. So there is hope. And the thing I love about this country is the innovation, the creativity. It is kind of a melting pot in different ways, even though, there's definitely racism. But, if we can only find our vision again and new myths to motivate us and really find new ways of making meaning and coming together, because there is a lack of meaning, there is a sense of isolation that I think a lot of people are feeling. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, like, I think it's last year when the trucking thing was going on in Canada, and people from the United States was going over to help, and I think it's because of the internet. Otherwise, we just would have known whatever the news told us, what was going on over there, and not known the full story. And then in other countries, things are going on, and people say, oh no, this is the real story. This is what's really, don't listen to this, because this is what, and so,
And
yeah.
we're all connected. Each role is important. Farmers are important. Yeah, truckers. We need all these different roles in society to function. Each person has value. And I am so sick of, emphasis or value only being placed on a narrow range of, individuals. If you have monetary wealth, or if you have some degree of fame or position or leadership. All roles are important. I work at a hospital part-time, and the janitors, imagine if they weren't there doing their job. That's typically considered, one of the lowest jobs, but that's so important. That is so critical to the functioning of the hospital, having that cleanliness, food service. Even looking at how these people are often treated. And that was my hope during COVID. We could really look at the world in a different way. That if we could face, collectively an existential crisis, rather than going into, more fear, more paranoia, isolation, of really helping one another. And in some ways that did happen, but that's my hope, is that,
Yeah, it was so funny because, well, it's not funny, it is now, but at the time, oh, only overweight people are going to get that. Only old people are going to get that. I'm physically fit. I'm not going to get it, That wasn't the
Right.
case. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
vaccinated, so I'm safe. I'm not
Right.
going to get it. You're not vaccinated, so you're going around killing people. That wasn't the case. And
Exactly.
it was just something to watch people be so stupid and jump on a wagon, and any reason to hate another group.
Yes. It's that scapegoating tendency. you
And whether
know,
it's
blaming the
families, it's
other.
society,
Exactly.
and those, like you said, you call them dark shadows. I mean, they're pretty easy to pinpoint.
Yeah.
And so I
So
just, oh well, you probably just like nobody's probably left. Everybody's went to sleep. The crickets are chirping. So I really appreciate. I don't want to keep you any longer. So I
oh,
appreciate
and I
you
don't
coming.
think so at all. I mean, this is all relevant. It's all related. You know, this question of, yeah, life and death, what meaning there is, and I do think there is life beyond death. I mean, I felt that from my experience. And maybe if people had less fear, we wouldn't be treating each other this way. So,
Everybody talks about the life review. It seems like it matters how we treat each other.
yes,
On the other
yes.
side, it matters. A lot of people say, oh, there's no judgment. Well, that's not what we're getting from life review.
It
And
does
another thing that
matter.
fascinates me is so many people are told it's not your time. I was told it was my time. And I
Oh,
never even heard of
wow.
an NDE. I didn't think it ever happened to anybody before but me after it happened. I'd never heard of such thing.
Wow.
But I was told the answer was no. I wasn't allowed to go back. It is your time. And then I hear all these people say, well, I was told it was my time. And I think I've only heard one other person say
Wow.
they were told that it was their time. And they was, like me, they argued their case. They had kids at home and got the heck out of there.
Wow.
Or
Wow.
they're told, they have something they're supposed to do.
Mhm.
They just come back with a feeling that there's something they're supposed to do. And it
Yeah.
just makes you think about who they are that decide when we're done, when it is our time. What is it that we're supposed to do, and why are we supposed to do it? Why does it matter? Like, it's so important.
Yes. Yeah. That is interesting. And that's why when people talk about, God's plan and that kind of thing, I really do wonder about that because it just does seem that there's such order to this universe and all our different lives have an impact on one another, even if it's small and minute. It's just incredible. And there was definitely an experience of having that kind of different perspective after coming back, of feeling grateful for all the suffering I had been through. And a lot of NDEers report that when you have that experience of being on the other side, there's just incredible gratitude for one's life. And
Yeah, it's like I
and
wouldn't have known this if I didn't
yes,
go through that. And
exactly.
it seems like it was so important that I learned this.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then it makes you feel like, who wanted me to learn this? Why did they want me to learn this?
Mhm.
Now what happens now that I learned this?
It's only natural to ask those questions, and we should be encouraging people to ask those questions.
Because a lot of people just want to stop with, here's my NDE, and everybody go, wow, on the next one. Here's what happened my NDE. Wow. And I'm like, slow down. Let's
Yeah.
pick this apart.
Yes. This is fascinating. It's so interesting.
It's
All
just
these
like
different.
it's in a little tiny pill, and it's just like that's the story. It was like, no, 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 because we pull it and it'll be this big, and look what all we can see now, and we got more
Mhm.
questions.
Yes, yes, more questions. And it's so sacred to, I think, and spiritual to ask those questions of who am I? What is God? What am I a part of? It's so humbling, to feel that. And yeah, look at the world in a different way. I mean, it's really taught me to try to be grateful for every breath, every moment, and embrace, the good and the bad, and recognize a lot of the times where I went through some of the most intense suffering, like I did learn a lesson. It did help me gain inner strength or wisdom or empathy. So, I mean,
I just
yeah.
keep getting this visual of, you get a puzzle, say it's got 5,000 pieces, and you see on the front of the box the picture when it's done. It's like that's your life when you're born, and God just takes that box, dumps it out, blows it everywhere. Have fun, go get it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That is the coolest analogy.
And like, people die young. Well, maybe they just had 100-piece puzzle. That's all they needed. We
Yes.
needed the
Yeah.
5,000 box.
I mean, human suffering and evil really does make sense, I think, when there is a belief in God or when there is an idea of something bigger, not just from the human perspective, but some grander, design or order. I mean, it
Yeah,
makes sense, but it also inspires that sense of awe and
and
mystery at
when
the
we
same
have those
time.
NDEs and OBEs, STEs, after death communication, we know it. We just don't wonder anymore. We know it.
But it's hard to communicate.
Yeah.
It's that ineffable sense of something just beyond.
Yeah. It's like
But
if like this house, if I always lived with stuff on the windows, I could never look out. And
Mhm.
one day I opened the door and looked out and hurried and shut the door. I'm telling everybody, guess what's out there? And like, it's like what an NDE and all these things are like. You get this glimpse. And then you try to find words
Yes.
and you try to get people to believe you and they don't believe you, but you know now. It's out
Yes.
there.
Yes.
And living in
Oh,
here doesn't feel the same anymore. Got a
yes.
glimpse.
Exactly. Oh, such good analogies and ways of describing that. I appreciate that.
So thank you, because I know we could
Thank
go
you.
all day.
Yes. Thank you too,
I'll let you
Peggy.
go. Enjoy your weekend.
Okay. Thank you.
All
Thanks for
right,
reaching
bye-bye.
out.